He waited 6 months for a bride who never came. Instead, a woman stepped off that stagecoach carrying a gun, a secret, and a warning that would turn his quiet life into a fight for survival. She was not the woman he wrote to. She was not the woman he expected. But she was the one who would stand beside him when bullets flew and betrayal came from the man he trusted most. This is the story of Samuel Reed, a lonely rancher who asked for love and got a war. And what he found on the other side of that war was something no letter could ever promise. You are listening to Cowboy Chronicles, where the dust never settles and the stories never fade. This is your home for tales of love and grit, forged under western skies, where the heart rides as hard as the horse beneath it. Sometimes the life you planned is not the life you were meant to live, and the person you need most is never the one you expected. True belonging is not found in comfort. It is built in the moments when someone chooses to stand beside you and stay. If this story stirred something in you, tap that like button and let me know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who believes the best love stories are the ones nobody saw coming. And if you have not already, subscribe to Cowboy Chronicles so you never miss a ride. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community. New stories drop every week. Saddle up. We are just getting started.
The chair on the right side of the table had been empty for 3 years. This morning, Samuel Reed set a plate on it. Then he removed it. Then he set it back again. He stood there looking at it like a man trying to decide whether hope was a kindness or a cruelty. The cabin was quiet, save for the wind pressing against the walls the way it always did up on the North Ridge. Wyoming wind did not knock. It leaned. It tested every board and every nail and every seam until it found the weakness. Samuel had patched most of them over the years, but the wind always found new ones. He picked up the plate and placed it back in the cupboard. Not yet. September light came through the plank gaps in thin gold lines that striped the dirt floor. The smell of dry pine hung in the air, mixed with the faint sourness of cold ash in the stove. Samuel pulled on his boots and laced them slow. He had nowhere to rush. The stagecoach was not due until midday. But he had been awake since 4, and there was nothing left to do in a cabin he had already cleaned twice. He opened the small drawer beside the bed and looked at what lay inside. A square of white cotton folded neat. Ruth's handkerchief. He had washed it so many times the embroidered R in the corner had faded to a ghost of thread. He touched it with one finger. Then he closed the drawer. Some mornings it helped to touch it. Some mornings it did not. He stepped outside, and the cold hit him across the face like a slap from an old friend. The sky was pale and enormous. The North Ridge stretched out below him in a long roll of yellow grass and red rock, and the dark green of pine stands clinging to the higher slopes. His cattle moved slow across the far pasture. 32 head. Enough to keep a man fed and busy, not enough to make him rich. Samuel had never wanted rich. He had wanted full. There was a difference, and most men never learned it. He saddled his horse, a brown mare named Copper, who was steady and uninteresting, and that was exactly what he needed in a horse. Old Ghost stood in the corral watching him with one ear turned forward. The gray was too stubborn to saddle on a day like this. Samuel had learned years ago that Old Ghost chose his own riding days, and no amount of persuasion changed the animal's mind. The ride into Red Hollow took the better part of an hour. The trail wound down from the ridge through a cut in the rock where the walls rose up on both sides, stained red and orange by iron in the stone. Water trickled down the face of the rock in a thin silver line that would freeze solid within the month. At the bottom, the land opened up into the valley where the town sat like a handful of buildings thrown into the dust by a careless hand. Red Hollow was not much to look at. One main street barely 200 paces long, a livery stable at the north end, a general store, a boarding house run by Mrs. Agnes Park, who was neither kind nor unkind, but simply permanent like the rock itself, a post office, a small jail that had not held a prisoner in 4 months. And at the south end, a church with a bell that rang on Sundays whether anyone showed up or not. The smell of horse dung mixed with coffee drifting out of Mrs. Park's place. Dust hung in the air like it had nowhere else to be. A hawk circled above the livery stable riding the thermals with its wings spread wide and still. Heat shimmered off tin roofs even this late in the season. Samuel tied Copper outside the post office and went in. Nothing, no letter, no telegram. He had not expected one, but the checking had become a ritual, and rituals were what a lonely man used to mark his days. He stepped back outside and nearly walked into Thomas Harlan. Harlan was leaning against the post with his arms crossed, and a grin that showed too many teeth for a Tuesday morning. He was a solid man with a thick mustache and a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. 40 years old. 12 years Samuel had known him. They had mended fences together in spring and shared Saturday whiskey in winter. Harlan was the closest thing Samuel had to a best friend, and both of them knew it without ever saying so. Well, now. Harlan straightened up and adjusted his hat. The big day. You ready to meet the future Mrs. Reed? Samuel exhaled through his nose. Do not start, Tom. I am not starting anything. I am merely observing that a man who has cleaned his cabin 4 times in 2 weeks and trimmed his beard 3 times in 1 might be a touch nervous. I trimmed it twice. Harlan laughed. It was a warm sound. Easy. The kind of laugh that made you trust a man without thinking about why. He clapped Samuel on the shoulder. Listen, I need her full name for the security ledger. New arrivals and all. The sheriff in Casper wants us keeping records now. Samuel did not hesitate. Eleanor Whitfield, arriving on the noon coach from Cheyenne. Harlan repeated the name quietly as if committing it to memory. Eleanor Whitfield. He nodded. I will make sure the welcome is proper. Samuel looked down the empty road. The dust had not yet begun to rise. It would soon enough. The stage was never late. He felt something turn in his chest. Not quite fear, not quite joy. Something between the two that had no name, but every man who ever waited for something important knew the feeling. He had placed the advertisement 6 months ago, a simple notice in 3 newspapers. He wrote that he owned a modest ranch on the north ridge of Red Hollow, Wyoming territory, that he valued hard work and kindness, that he wanted a partner, not a servant. He did not ask for beauty. He asked for loyalty. He did not promise wealth. He promised respect. 42 women had responded. Most of them wanted to know how many rooms the house had or whether he attended church on Sundays. But one letter was different. Eleanor Whitfield of St. Louis wrote about losing her parents, about wanting open sky instead of crowded streets, about starting fresh in a place where the horizon was not blocked by rooftops. Her handwriting was neat and careful, and her words carried weight without being heavy. Over months, the letters grew warmer. She told him she was learning to bake bread from scratch. He told her about Old Ghost, the gray horse that refused any rider but him. She said she admired strong men with soft hearts. He folded that line and kept it in his shirt pocket for 3 days. By late summer, she wrote that she would arrive on the 10th of September. Samuel had prepared everything. He repaired the loose board on the porch, painted the shutters, bought a new quilt from Mrs. Park's store. He had even set that second plate on the table this morning before his nerve failed him. Now the dust was rising. He saw it first as a pale cloud at the far end of the valley road. Then the shape of the coach appeared. 4 horses pulling hard. The driver hunched forward with the reins wrapped tight around his fists, wheels grinding against rock and dirt. Townfolk gathered the way they always did when the stage arrived. Not many, maybe a dozen. Enough for word to spread if anything worth talking about happened. Samuel stood apart from them, hat in his hands, blue-gray eyes fixed on the coach. It rolled to a stop in front of the post office with a groan of wood and leather. The driver climbed down first. He stretched his back and spat into the dust. Then the door opened. An older woman stepped out, gray hair beneath a bonnet. She looked around with the confused expression of someone who had expected more. After her came a thin boy carrying a cloth sack. He could not have been older than 12. He hurried off toward the general store without looking back. Samuel waited. No one else appeared. His chest tightened. The driver began unloading luggage from the rear boot. 2 trunks, a wooden crate. Samuel's hand squeezed the brim of his hat. Then the coach door opened one more time. The woman who stepped down was not what he expected. She was not what anyone expected. She wore fitted riding trousers and a long dark coat dusted from the road. A wide-brimmed hat sat low on her head, casting shadow across half her face. Her boots were scuffed and trail-worn, and at her left hip hung a revolver in a leather holster that had seen enough use to be soft at the edges. She was not tall. Medium height, with a straight back and a way of standing that said she had measured every person in the crowd before her second boot hit the ground. Her skin was browned from sun. Her dark hair was braided tight and tucked beneath the hat. There was a scar on her right forearm, thin and faded. A knife mark, if Samuel had to guess. She looked directly at him, not at the crowd, not at the buildings, at him, as if she had known exactly where he would be standing. "Are you Samuel Reed?" Her voice carried clear across the space between them. It was not a question so much as a confirmation. "I am." He paused. "I was expecting someone else." A faint expression crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Something harder. "I know. That is why I am here." She held out an envelope. The handwriting on the front was Eleanor's. He would have known it from across a room, those careful, neat letters, the way she looped her lowercase e. But the smell of gunpowder on this woman's hand was not Eleanor's. Samuel took the envelope. His fingers were not steady. He opened it and read. The letter was short. Eleanor wrote that she had fallen ill days before departure, that she could not travel west, that she had sent her closest and most trusted friend in her place. The friend would explain everything. The friend would decide what came next. He read it twice. The words did not change. Around him, the whispers had already started. A mail-order bride was uncommon enough, but a bride who arrived armed and wearing trousers instead of a dress was something Red Hollow had never seen. He looked up from the letter. "You are her friend. I am Lydia Cross, and before you ask, no, I am not here to marry you." A few men in the crowd shifted. Someone let out a nervous laugh. Samuel ignored them. "Then why are you here, Miss Cross?" She stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear. Her eyes were dark brown and sharp as cut glass, and beneath the sharpness, he saw something else, something she was working hard to hide. "Because Eleanor is in danger, and the danger followed her letters straight to you." She handed him the letter. The handwriting on the envelope was Eleanor's, but the smell of gunpowder on this woman's hand was not. Lydia Cross had calculated 6 ways out of this town before her boots touched the ground. She had not calculated a 7th. That his eyes looked exactly the way Eleanor had described them, gray-blue and quiet and carrying something heavy behind them. That cost her half a second to focus, and half a second was more than she usually gave anyone. She steadied herself and took stock. The town was small, 1 road in and 1 road out unless you counted the canyon trail to the north, which she did because she always counted every trail. 12 people in the gathering crowd. 3 men carrying visible weapons. 1 deputy with a badge standing near the post office, who had watched her step off the coach with an expression she could not yet read. The livery stable had 6 horses tied outside. The boarding house had a 2nd floor with windows facing the main street. Good sight lines if someone wanted them. She catalogued all of this in the time it took Samuel Reed to open the envelope. He was taller than she expected, lean in the way men got when they worked land instead of sitting behind desks. His hands were calloused but not rough. He held the letter carefully the way a man holds something that matters, His beard was trimmed close. Recent. She noticed that too. He had groomed for someone, not for her. He looked like a man accustomed to waiting. That was the thought that surfaced, and she pushed it down because thoughts like that were not useful. When he finished reading the letter and looked at her, she saw the confusion first. Then the disappointment he was too proud to show fully. Then something else. Wariness. Good. Wariness kept people alive. She gave him the short version. Eleanor had inherited land from her father. The deed had never been registered. A mining company called Prescott Mining wanted that land before Eleanor could file claim. Their people had already tracked Eleanor to her boarding house in St. Louis. She fled. Lydia followed the trail and found that letters between Eleanor and Samuel had been copied by someone with access to the postal route. "Why not send another letter?" Samuel asked. "Letters can be intercepted. By who? By someone you trust." He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze and did not explain further. She did not yet know who the informant was, but she knew there was one. The trail she followed had too many convenient turns. Someone in this town was feeding information, and she intended to find out who. Samuel folded the letter and placed it inside his vest. The crowd was still watching. The deputy with the mustache was walking toward them with the easy stride of a man who believed he had authority. "Everything all right here, Samuel?" The deputy asked it casually, but his eyes stayed on Lydia's revolver. "Fine, Tom. Just a misunderstanding with the coach. The deputy, Tom Harlan." She filed the name. He smiled at her. It was a generous smile, warm, practiced. She did not trust practiced smiles. Samuel suggested they ride to the ranch. Lydia agreed. Standing in the middle of a town where she knew no one and trusted no one was not a position she intended to hold any longer than necessary. They rode north. The trail climbed out of the valley through a narrow cut in red rock, where the walls rose high on both sides. Water seeped down the stone face in thin lines that caught the light. The air smelled of iron and wet earth and pine from the higher slopes. Below them, the town shrank to a scattering of rooftops and dust. Lydia rode well. She sat the horse the way a person sits who has spent more nights sleeping in a saddle than in a bed. She kept her weight centered and her hands light and her eyes moving, always moving. The ridge to the left, the tree line to the right. The road ahead and the road behind. Samuel noticed. She could tell by the way he glanced at her and then looked away. He was studying her the way she was studying the landscape, carefully, without wanting to be caught. Red rock gave way to yellow earth. The grass turned silver, tipped and bent in the wind. Foxtail grass, she thought. She had seen it before in Montana. A red-tailed hawk screamed somewhere above them, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls and faded into the enormous sky. Cloud shadows raced across the hills like animals running from something only they could see. The trail leveled out along a creek, clear water running over smooth stone. They stopped to let the horses drink. That was when she saw the hoofprints. She dismounted without a word and knelt at the mud bank. 2 sets of tracks, shod horses. The impressions were crisp, not yet dried at the edges. 2 hours old at most, maybe less. Someone had ridden this trail ahead of them, heading toward the ranch. She said nothing to Samuel yet. She memorized the track pattern. The left front shoe on one horse had a nick in it. Distinctive. She would know it again. They remounted and continued. The wind picked up as they climbed. It carried the smell of sage and something else, smoke. Faint, old, like a campfire left to die that morning. When the ranch came into view, Lydia slowed her horse and looked. The cabin sat on a shelf of flat ground near the top of the ridge, built from logs with a stone chimney on the east side, a porch across the front. Behind it, a barn and a corral where a gray horse stood watching them with suspicious ears. Fences stretched out across the open land marking pasture boundaries. 30 or so cattle grazed in the distance. It was not grand, but it was solid. A man had built this with his own hands and his own back, and that fact showed in every joint and beam. "You built this yourself." She said it before she meant to. "With my own hands," he replied. She nodded once. as if that answer carried weight. It did. They approached the barn first. Samuel dismounted and stopped. The barn door was open. Not the way a man leaves it when he rides out in the morning. The latch had been forced. The wood around it was splintered fresh. Inside, the hay had been overturned. Crates shifted. Feed sacks opened and searched. Nothing taken that Samuel could see. But someone had been looking for something specific. They went to the cabin next. Samuel unlocked the door and stepped in. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said it flat and without expression. "The letters are gone. Every letter Eleanor sent me. All of them. Gone." Lydia felt her stomach tighten. She had expected trouble to follow her. She had not expected it to arrive first. "They are faster than I expected," she said. Samuel looked at her. In his eyes, she saw the first real edge of something beyond confusion. He was beginning to understand that whatever had stepped off that stagecoach with her was larger than a letter and more dangerous than distance. He locked the cabin door. She watched him do it. The bolt slid home with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. For the first time in 6 years on this ridge, the lock was not meant to keep out the wind. Lydia slept with her gun beneath the pillow. Samuel knew this because at midnight he heard metal tap against wood when she turned over in the spare room. It was a small sound, brief, but in a cabin this quiet, even the smallest sound carried. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling and thought that it was the saddest thing he had ever heard inside these walls. Sadder than silence. Sadder than the nights after Ruth when the only sound was his own breathing, and he wished even that would stop. He rose before dawn. The stove took a few minutes to heat. He put coffee on and stepped outside to check the animals. The air was cold enough to sting his nostrils. Frost had settled overnight on the fence rails and the grass near the creek. The sky was still dark in the west, but the east had begun to pale. Stars faded one by one like lanterns blown out by a hand too large to see. Old Ghost stood in the corral with his head up watching Samuel the way he always did, alert, judgmental. The gray horse had opinions about everything and expressed them through his ears and his refusal to cooperate. Samuel had owned him 7 years, and in that time Old Ghost had accepted exactly one rider, Samuel himself. Everyone else got bucked or bitten or simply ignored, which was somehow worse. Samuel fed the cattle, checked the fence line along the south pasture, found one post leaning and braced it with a rock. The work was good, physical. It kept his hands busy, and his mind from wandering to the woman sleeping inside his house with a revolver for a companion. When he came back inside, the coffee was already poured. Lydia sat at the table with both hands wrapped around a tin cup. She had made the coffee herself. He took one sip and nearly coughed. It was black as tar and strong enough to dissolve a nail. Miner camp coffee. The kind brewed by people who needed to stay awake through a 12-hour shift underground. He drank it without comment. She watched him drink it. If she was waiting for a reaction, she did not get one. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe. Or the beginning of respect. The morning passed in a careful rhythm. 2 strangers learning how to share a small space without stepping on each other. Samuel mended harness leather at the table. Lydia cleaned and oiled a saddle on the porch. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was not hostile. It was testing. The way 2 animals circled each other, deciding whether to fight or graze. Samuel found himself watching her when she was not looking. She moved efficiently. No wasted motion. When she reached for a tool, she knew exactly where it was, even in a space she had only occupied for 1 day. She sat with her back to the wall. Always. He noticed that. Even on the porch, she positioned herself where no one could approach from behind. She was nothing like the woman he had imagined. Eleanor's letters had painted a picture of gentleness. A woman who baked bread and pressed flowers and dreamed of quiet evenings by a fire. Lydia did not bake. She stripped and reassembled a revolver with the same attention a surgeon gave to instruments. Her hands were not soft. Her eyes were not dreamy. She was built for a world that did not forgive softness, and she had adapted accordingly. And yet, there were small things. The way she paused at the window and looked out at the valley with an expression that was not tactical but wistful. The way she touched the quilt on the spare bed with one finger as if surprised by its softness. The way she said Eleanor's name, not casually, with a tenderness she clearly did not extend to many people or things. That afternoon, she found him behind the barn, shooting at tin cans on the fence. His aim was decent, was 7 out of 10 at 40 yards. She watched 3 rounds before she spoke. "You shoot to warn," she said. He lowered the rifle. "I shoot to hit what I aim at. You aim wide on purpose. You pull right at the last second, every time." She stepped forward and held out her hand for the rifle. "May I?" He handed it to her. She raised it, sighted, fired. The tin can did not fall over. It exploded. She handed the rifle back. "I shoot to end things," she said. "Not because I enjoy it, because the kind of men who come after people like Eleanor do not respond to warnings." He looked at the destroyed can, then at her. Something cold moved through his chest. Not fear exactly. An awareness that the world she came from operated on rules he had never needed to learn, rules where a warning shot was wasted ammunition and mercy was a luxury earned, not given. "You have killed men." He said it without accusation, a fact seeking confirmation. She met his eyes. "I have stopped men from killing others." Whether they died in the process was their choice, not mine. They rode into town that afternoon for supplies. The air was warmer now. Dust rose around the horses' hooves in small golden clouds. Red Hollow looked the same as it always did. Ordinary. Ordinary was what made it dangerous. Because ordinary meant complacent, and complacent meant blind. At the general store, Samuel bought flour and salt and coffee beans and a new box of cartridges. Lydia stayed near the door, not browsing, watching. Mrs. Agnes Park appeared from the back room carrying a bolt of fabric. She was a lean woman with iron-gray hair pulled tight and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same red rock as the canyon walls. She had buried 2 husbands and 1 son, and the losses had not made her gentle. They had made her permanent. She looked at Lydia the way she might look at a coyote that had wandered into the store. Head to toe, slow, missing nothing. "So you are what the post office delivered instead of a bride." Mrs. Park said it clearly, loudly enough for the 2 men at the counter to hear. Lydia did not flinch. "I was not delivered, Mrs. Park. I arrived." Mrs. Park's mouth tightened. Whether in disapproval or suppressed amusement was impossible to tell. Outside, they found Doc Merriweather sitting on a bench in front of his office. He was a man who looked exactly like what he was. 60 years old, tired, intelligent. A half-empty bottle of whiskey within arm's reach, though it was barely past noon. His hands were clean and steady despite the drinking, and that said something about his constitution. He beckoned Samuel over. The old doctor's voice was low and careful. 2 strangers rented a room at Park's 3 days back. Well-dressed, Eastern clothes, asking about land claims around the Silver Range. Tom Harlan directed them to the land office up at the county seat. Samuel frowned slightly. Tom would do that. It is his job. Doc shrugged. Maybe. But they were not asking the way prospectors ask. They were asking the way lawyers ask. Specific. Like they already knew what they were looking for. Samuel thanked him and filed it away. He trusted Harlan. Had no reason not to. A deputy directing strangers to the land office was routine business. Nothing to worry about. On the ride home, the wind shifted. It came from the north now, carrying the first real bite of coming winter. The grass bent flat, and the horses tucked their heads. Lydia rode beside him in silence. She had been quiet since the general store. Then, without warning, she pulled her horse to a stop. Samuel reined up beside her. "What is it?" Lydia looked at him. The wind pushed loose strands of dark hair across her face. Her eyes were steady, serious. carrying something heavy that she was about to set down. "I need to tell you something. Eleanor is not just my friend. She is my half-sister, same father, different mother. Her father was my father, too. He never claimed me. I grew up in a mining camp with my mother. She died when I was 14. Eleanor was the only one in that family who ever came looking for me." Samuel said nothing. He waited. Lydia continued. Her voice was controlled, but beneath the control he could hear the effort it cost her. "That inheritance, the land near the Silver Range. If Eleanor dies, it passes to me by law. I am the only other living heir. That is why I cannot let anyone know who I am, because if the men chasing her find out there are two of us, they will come for both. They will kill her and force me to sign, or kill us both and forge the documents." She paused. The wind filled the space where her voice had been. "I did not come here just as her friend Samuel. I came as her blood. And that blood is the reason we are both in danger." He looked at her, really looked. Beneath the sun-darkened skin and the scar and the hard set of her jaw, he saw something he had missed before, her eyes, the shape of them. The way the corners turned down, just slightly. He had stared at Eleanor's handwriting for months, had memorized every curve of every letter, and now he realized that Lydia's eyes carried the same shape, the same quiet downward turn. Sisters. He had promised to protect one woman. Now he stood between two sisters and a land war and a truth he could not unsee. If he failed, he would lose more than peace. He would lose the person he had already begun thinking about each night before sleep, though he did not dare call it by name. Not yet. She had told the truth. That was either a mistake or a turning point, and Lydia did not know which. But the way Samuel went silent for the entire ride home made her lean toward the first. He did not speak when they unsaddled the horses, did not speak when they walked inside, did not speak through supper, which was beans and hard bread, and silence thick enough to cut. He sat across from her at the small table and looked at his plate and ate without tasting, and she knew this because she was doing the same thing. She had miscalculated. She had believed that honesty would build trust. Instead, it had built a wall. Not because he was angry about the secret. She could see that clearly. He was not angry about the lie. He was hurt because once again a woman had come to him carrying a purpose that had nothing to do with him. He had wanted a bride. He had gotten a bodyguard. He had wanted companionship. He had gotten a war. Lydia understood that hurt because she had caused it before. It was her pattern. Arriving in someone's life with a storm at her back and calling it protection. Her mother used to say she had a gift for turning shelter into a battlefield. She washed the dishes in a basin of water she heated on the stove. The water was too hot. It reddened her hands. She looked at them. Rough hands. Working hands. Not so different from her mother's hands, which had been cracked and raw from years of washing other people's clothes in a mining camp outside of Helena. Her mother, Margaret Cross, had taken in laundry for the miners, boiling shirts in lye until her knuckles bled. She was never acknowledged by the Whitfield family, never received a letter or a dollar or even the dignity of her name spoken aloud in their house. Margaret had one rule she repeated until the day she died. Never beg them for a thing, Lydia. Not a single thing. You hear me? Lydia heard. She had carried that instruction like a loaded weapon for 14 years after her mother's death. Eleanor was the one who broke through. Eleanor Whitfield, 20 years old at the time. She had traveled alone from St. Louis to Helena, knocked on the door of the boarding house where Lydia was working as a maid, stood there with tears running down a face that looked nothing and everything like Lydia's own. "I have a sister," Eleanor had said, "and I have been looking for you for 2 years." That was the moment Lydia's armor cracked. Not broke. Cracked. She let Eleanor in. Just Eleanor. No one else. And she had spent every year since then making sure that crack did not widen. Now she stood in a stranger's kitchen drying dishes and wondering if the crack was spreading anyway. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm that was not comfortable but was not unbearable either. Samuel worked the ranch. Lydia helped without being asked. She mended a fence post that had split at the base. She carried water from the well. She fed the horses every morning and checked the perimeter of the property every evening. She did these things not because she was told to, but because stillness made her nervous, and work kept the nervousness at bay. The season was turning hard. Morning frost grew thicker each day. The creek water ran cold enough to ache her teeth when she drank from it. Horse breath rose in white clouds. The grass had gone from silver to brown, and the cottonwood trees along the creek bottom had begun to drop their leaves, yellow leaves drifting down to the dark water. She noticed things about Samuel, small things that he probably did not know he revealed. The way he talked to his cattle when he thought no one was listening. Calm, steady words. Easy, boy. Come on now, move along. The way he hung his hat on the same hook every night. The way he stood on the porch at dawn and looked at the valley like a man reading a letter he had memorized long ago. He was not complicated. Or rather, he was complicated in the way simple things are complicated. A stone is simple, but the pressure that made it took 1,000,000 years. On the third morning, something happened that surprised her. She had gone to the corral to feed the horses. Old Ghost the Gray stood at the far end. He was the most difficult animal she had ever encountered. The first day, he had pinned his ears and shown his teeth when she approached. The second day, he had turned his rump to her and ignored her completely. She had not pushed. She had simply left his feed and walked away each time. This morning, he was standing by the gate, waiting. When she approached, he did not pin his ears. He did not turn away. He lowered his head slightly and let her stroke the flat bone between his eyes. His coat was rough and warm. He smelled like dust and grass and the particular musk of a horse who had lived long enough to earn opinions. She fed him by hand. He took the grain gently. His lips were soft against her palm. She did not see Samuel watching from the cabin window. But he was there, and the expression on his face was one she would not have recognized, because it was the expression of a man watching something he thought was impossible, happening right in front of him. Old Ghost had not let another person touch him in 7 years. That evening, Samuel broke his silence. They were sitting at the table. The stove crackled. Wind pressed against the cabin walls. Lydia was cleaning her revolver, the parts laid out on a cloth in neat rows. She could assemble it blindfolded. Had done so more than once. Samuel reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a folded cloth. White cotton. An embroidered letter in the corner so faded it was barely visible. He set it on the table between them. Lydia looked at it. She did not touch it. She understood objects like this, objects that carried the weight of someone who was gone. My wife. Ruth. Samuel spoke slowly, choosing each word the way he chose fence posts. For strength. She died 3 years ago. Typhoid fever. I sat beside the bed for 7 days, changed the wet cloth on her forehead every hour, held her hand until it went cold. And there was nothing I could do, not one thing. He paused. His jaw worked. If you want to know why I went quiet these past days, it is because I am trying to understand something. Every woman who walks into this house comes carrying something I cannot hold on to. Ruth carried a sickness I could not cure. Eleanor carried a dream that never arrived. And you carry a war I did not start. I am trying to understand what it means that my hands are never enough. The cabin was very quiet. The wind had stopped for a moment as if it too was listening. Lydia set down the gun barrel she had been polishing. She looked at him across the table, at his hands, at the handkerchief, at his eyes which were not asking for pity but for understanding. And those were very different things. I do not need you to hold on to me, Samuel. I need you to stand beside me. There is a difference. He looked at her for a long time. Something shifted in his expression. Not a wall coming down. A door opening 1 inch. That night, Lydia did not place the gun beneath her pillow. She set it on the bedside table, still within arm's reach, but no longer pressed against her skin. It was the smallest distance she had ever granted any place she had slept. And in that small distance was something she had not felt in years. The beginning of safety. On the 9th day, they found the cow. Samuel saw it first. A dark shape in the center of the ranch road about 200 yards from the cabin. At first he thought it had simply laid down and died, which happens sometimes with older animals. Then he got closer. The cow had been killed with a knife, a long, clean cut across the throat. Deliberate, professional. But that was not the worst of it. Someone had carved the brand from its hide, cut it right out of the skin and taken it. Left the carcass with its guts spilled open across the dirt road. The blood had dried dark in the morning cold. Flies had not yet found it, which meant it was fresh, killed sometime in the night while they slept. Samuel stood over it and felt something move through him. Not fear, anger, the slow kind, the kind that did not burn hot and fast but settled deep into the bone and stayed. Lydia knelt beside the carcass and studied the cuts. She said nothing for a long time. "They took the brand," Samuel said. She nodded. "They want you to know they were here, close enough to kill something of yours while you slept." She stood and wiped her hands on her trousers. "This is not robbery, Samuel. This is a message." Over the next 2 days, the messages continued. Fence wire cut in the night along the south pasture. Boot prints circling the cabin found at dawn. A wooden gate left open so cattle wandered. Each act was small enough to deny, but together they formed a pattern as clear as words written on a wall. Leave. That was the message. Leave, or the next thing we cut will not be fence wire. Samuel rode into town to report to Harlan. The deputy listened with appropriate concern. He wrote notes in a small leather book. He shook his head and muttered about lawlessness and the territory needing more marshals. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Sam, I know this is not what you want to hear, but maybe you should send the girl somewhere safe. I can arrange a stagecoach quiet-like. No one would know. Get her out of Red Hollow until this blows over." Samuel almost agreed. The words were reasonable. The tone was warm. It was exactly what a good friend would say. Then he remembered what Lydia had told him on the first day. "Do not trust anyone who arranges an escape route for me." He thanked Harlan and said he would think about it. 2 days later, Virgil Kane arrived at the ranch. Samuel heard the horse before he saw it. A single rider approaching from the south road. Slow, confident. The horse was a black thoroughbred. Too fine for ranch work. Too expensive for anyone who made their living honestly in this part of the territory. The rider dismounted at the gate. He was a man of about 50, tall and thin, wearing a black suit that was only slightly dusty from the ride. His boots were polished. His hat was new. He removed it politely and held it against his chest. "Mr. Reed, good morning. My name is Virgil Kane. I represent Prescott Mining Company. I apologize for arriving unannounced." His voice was smooth, educated, Eastern. He spoke the way lawyers spoke, every word selected, every pause measured. He smiled, and the smile was warm and practiced and completely without warmth underneath. Lydia appeared on the porch behind Samuel. She had heard the horse too. Her right hand hung at her side near the revolver, not touching it, near it. Kane looked at her briefly, then back at Samuel. "I understand you have been experiencing some trouble. Cut fences, missing cattle, unfortunate business. The territory is full of drifters these days. Hard to know who to trust." Samuel said nothing. He waited. Kane continued. "I will be direct, Mr. Reed. Prescott Mining has an interest in land near the Silver Range. We believe a Miss Eleanor Whitfield holds an unregistered deed to a parcel that may sit above a significant silver deposit. We would like to purchase that deed fairly, at a generous price, enough to set a man and his family comfortable for life." He paused. "Let the number hang in the air like bait. No one lives in peace on land hiding silver without an army to guard it. I am offering you quiet Mr. Reed. That is all." Lydia stepped off the porch. The board creaked under her boots. She walked until she stood beside Samuel, close enough for their shoulders nearly to touch. "The land is not his to sell," she said, "and it is not yours to buy." Cain studied her. His eyes moved over her face. The scar, the gun, the braid. Something shifted behind his polished expression. Recognition. He knew something about her that she had not told him. "You have more of your father in you than you know, Miss Cross." The words hit her like a slap. Samuel saw the pulse in her throat jump. But she did not blink, did not step back. She held Cain's gaze with a steadiness that would have made most men look away first. "I do not know what you are referring to," she said. Cain smiled. "Of course not." He replaced his hat, tipped it to both of them, mounted his horse with the ease of a man who owned expensive things and knew it. He rode away down the south road without looking back. The moment he was out of sight, Lydia's composure cracked. Not outward, inward. Samuel could see it in the way her hands clenched at her sides. "He knows who I am," she said. "Someone told him. Someone in this town." That night they found out who wanted them afraid. Samuel smelled the smoke before he heard anything. A sharp, acrid smell cutting through the cold night air. Not wood stove smoke. Harsher. Coal oil. He threw on boots and grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Lydia was already up, already armed. She had heard it too. Not the smoke, something else. Footsteps near the barn. They went out the back door. The barn was 50 yards from the cabin. In the moonlight, Samuel could see two figures crouched at the base of the barn wall. One of them held something. A lantern. The other was pouring liquid from a can. The sharp smell of coal oil burned in Samuel's nostrils. Lydia moved left. Samuel moved right. They did not discuss it. They did not need to. Two people who understood threat moved toward it the same way water moved downhill, naturally, without debate. Samuel fired first, a warning shot into the dirt 3 feet from the nearest man. The sound cracked across the ridge and echoed off the rock walls of the canyon. The men startled. One dropped the can, the other threw the lantern. It hit the barn wall and shattered. Fire bloomed, orange and yellow and hungry. It climbed the dry wood in seconds. Lydia fired from the left. Her shot was not a warning. It punched through the shoulder of the man who had thrown the lantern. He screamed and fell. The other man fired back blind. The bullet hit the dirt near Lydia's boots. She did not flinch. She fired again. The round took the man's hat clean off his head. He ran. The wounded man scrambled after him. They disappeared into the dark beyond the ridge. Samuel was already at the barn. The fire had caught one wall. He beat at it with a horse blanket while Lydia hauled water from the trough. They worked together in the red dancing light. Sweat and smoke and the desperate rhythm of two people fighting to save something that mattered. They got the fire down. The wall was charred but standing. The barn would survive. But Old Ghost would not. The gray horse had been inside when the lantern hit. A burning timber had fallen across the corral gate, trapping him. By the time Samuel reached him, the horse was standing in the corner, trembling. A long shard of burning wood had torn through his left flank. The wound was deep. Samuel could see the white of bone. He sent Lydia to town for Doc Merriweather. She rode hard and came back within the hour with the old doctor half asleep and fully sober for once. Doc examined the horse under lamplight. He was quiet for a long time. Then he straightened up and put his hand on Samuel's arm. "I am sorry, son. It is too deep. Infection will take him by morning even if I stitch it." Samuel did not argue. He had ranched long enough to know when a wound was beyond help. He had just hoped. That was all. Doc and Lydia stepped away. They waited by the fence. The night was very still. The stars were out. 10,000 of them scattered across the black Wyoming sky like someone had spilled a bucket of light. Samuel walked to Old Ghost. The gray horse looked at him with one dark eye. Calm now. The trembling had stopped. Samuel put his hand on the horse's neck, felt the warmth of him, the rough coat, the steady heartbeat beneath. "Forgive me, old man." He said it quietly, not a whisper, a statement, between equals. He raised the rifle. One shot. Then silence. Lydia stood in the barn doorway and watched him walk out. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from loss. She wanted to reach for him. She wanted to close the distance between them and put her hand on his arm or his back, or anywhere that would tell him he was not alone. She did not. Not because she was afraid of closeness, because she understood that some grief needed space before it could accept company. But she stepped close enough that he could feel her there, her presence in the dark, not touching, just near. And for the first time, Samuel Reed let someone see him weep. Lydia did not believe in gut feelings. She believed in tracks, in numbers, in the distance between a bullet hole and its target. These were things you could measure, things that held still long enough to be counted. But when Thomas Harlan stepped into the cabin 2 days after the fire carrying a bottle of whiskey and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes in all the right places, the only thing she believed in was the hair standing straight on the back of her neck. He came to help. That was what he said. Heard about the fire. Terrible business. Came as soon as he could get away from town duties. Brought whiskey because a man who lost a good horse deserved a drink. He helped Samuel clear the charred timber from the barn wall. Worked hard, sweated through his shirt. Cursed the men who did it with convincing fury. Told Samuel he would write to the county sheriff and request additional patrols along the ridge road. Every word was right. Every gesture was correct. Lydia watched. She watched from the porch with a tin cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She watched the way Harlan moved, the way he talked, the way he listened. And she cataloged everything that was wrong about a man who appeared to be doing everything right. He did not ask what the attackers looked like. Any lawman investigating a crime would want descriptions. Height, build, clothing, horses. Harlan asked none of these things. Instead, he asked how long Lydia planned to stay. Whether she had heard from Eleanor. Whether anyone else knew about the land claim. Questions an investigator would not ask. Questions a spy would. The opportunity came in the early afternoon. Harlan had gone outside with Samuel to inspect the fence line along the south pasture. Lydia watched them walk away. She counted their steps. Estimated the time it would take them to reach the fence and return. 8 minutes, maybe 10. She moved fast. Harlan's coat hung on the hook beside the cabin door. A heavy canvas coat lined with wool. She searched the outside pockets first. A folding knife, a plug of tobacco, a few coins, nothing unusual. The inside pocket. She almost missed it. A slip of paper folded small and tucked into the lining seam. She pulled it out. The note was short. Written in a hand she did not recognize. Small and precise. The kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who wrote letters for a living. W arriving the 10th. Confirm Silver Range route. Advise on disposition of the rancher. W. Whitfield. Eleanor, arriving the 10th. The exact date Eleanor was supposed to arrive in Red Hollow on the stagecoach. Confirm Silver Range route. Someone wanted to know the path to the land. Advise on disposition of the rancher. Disposition. A polite word. A legal word. The kind of word that could mean anything from relocate to remove to eliminate. Lydia's hands were steady. Her heart was not. She memorized the note. Every word, every letter form. Then she folded it back exactly as she had found it and replaced it in the coat lining. She was back on the porch with her cold coffee when they returned. That evening, after Harlan had ridden back to town, she sat across from Samuel at the table. The stove popped and hissed. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. The temperature had dropped. She could see her own breath inside the cabin. Thomas Harlan is the one selling information. She said it without preamble. There was no gentle way to say it, and she did not try. Samuel looked at her. His face did not change. Not at first. The change came slowly, like watching ice form on still water, starting at the edges and moving inward. I have known that man 12 years, and he has known everything about you for 12 years. Everything about this ranch. Everything you wrote in those letters to Eleanor, every hope you put on paper, he read first. Samuel's jaw tightened. Do you have proof, or only a feeling? Lydia reached into her shirt pocket and placed the piece of paper she had written the note's exact words onto. She had copied it from memory onto a scrap of brown wrapping paper. I found this in his coat, inside pocket. The handwriting is not his. Someone gives him instructions. He follows them. Samuel read the note slowly. His lips moved. When he finished, he read it again. Then he set it down. I know this handwriting, he said quietly. I saw it on a business card 3 days ago. Virgil Kane, Prescott Mining Company. The pieces fell together. Harlan was Kane's man inside Red Hollow. Every question Harlan asked Samuel. Every piece of information Samuel volunteered over Saturday whiskey. Every time Samuel mentioned Eleanor's name or the ranch or his plans for the future. All of it went straight to Prescott Mining. Samuel's trust had been a tool. His friendship had been an asset to be mined. Samuel stood up. He walked outside. The door was open behind him, and Lydia could see his silhouette against the night sky. Stars. Thousands of them. He walked to the fence rail and gripped it with both hands. His knuckles went white. His shoulders tightened. His head dropped forward. He stood like that for a long time. Lydia followed him outside. She did not speak. She did not touch him. She stood 3 feet behind him and to the left, where he could feel her presence but not be crowded by it. She had learned a long time ago that the best thing you could do for a man whose world had just shifted beneath him was to stand still and let him find his balance. The wind moved through the valley. It carried the smell of frost and pine and something else, the distant mineral sharpness of snow on the high peaks. Winter was closer than the calendar said. Finally, Samuel spoke. His voice was flat, emptied. We cannot trust anyone in this town. Lydia waited a beat. Then she asked the question she had been holding. What about Doc Merriweather? Samuel considered it. His grip on the fence loosened slightly. Doc is the only man Harlan never drinks with. Saturday nights, Harlan makes rounds. He drinks with the blacksmith. He drinks with the liveryman. He drinks with the ranchers who come in for supplies, but he never sits with Doc. Not once in 12 years. Maybe because Doc sees too clearly, Lydia said. Samuel nodded slowly. Maybe so. They stood in the cold dark and took stock of what they had. One aging physician who drank too much but whose mind was still sharp. 1.5 working guns because Samuel's rifle trigger had been sticking since spring, and he had not gotten around to fixing it. A copied note on brown paper. And 3 weeks. That was the deadline Doc had mentioned. 3 weeks before Prescott Mining could complete the legal paperwork to formally contest Eleanor's inheritance through the territorial courts. 3 weeks to find Eleanor, to get her claim registered before anyone could challenge it, to outmaneuver a deputy who knew their every move in a mining company with more money than most towns saw in a decade. Lydia looked at the map Eleanor had left behind. She had spread it on the table earlier. The Silver Range was marked in pencil. The land boundary was drawn in ink. Eleanor's hand. Careful. Precise. She thought about odds. She had faced worse. Once in Montana, she had tracked a man for 11 days through snow with a broken stirrup and half a canteen of water. But that time she had been alone. That time she had nothing to lose. This time was different. This time she had something she had not asked for and did not know how to name. Something that slept in the next room and made terrible coffee and had let her watch him cry over a dead horse without shame. Something that felt like it could become a home if she let it, and that terrified her more than any man with a gun ever had. The plan had 3 parts. Any one of them could get them killed. Samuel laid it out at the table the next morning. Lydia sat across from him. Between them the map, a pot of her terrible coffee, and the kind of silence that comes before a decision that cannot be undone. Part 1. Samuel would ride into Red Hollow and behave normally. He would visit the general store. He would sit outside Mrs. Park's place and drink coffee. He would let Harlan see him. Let Harlan believe nothing had changed. While in town, he would find a way to speak privately with Doc Merriweather and ask him to send a telegraph to a lawyer named Colton Briggs at the county seat. Briggs handled land disputes. If anyone could prepare emergency registration papers, it was him. Part 2. Lydia would ride east to Thornfield, the next town over, 12 miles by the Canyon Road. Thornfield had a rail depot. If Eleanor had traveled west from St. Louis, she would have passed through there. Someone might have seen her. Someone might know where she went. Part 3. If Lydia found Eleanor, they would bring her to the county seat to register the inheritance in person before the legal deadline. With a registered deed and a living heir, Prescott Mining's claim would collapse. 3 parts. Simple to explain, dangerous to execute, because every part required them to separate. And separating meant that Harlan would have 2 targets to watch instead of 1, and they would have no one to watch their backs. The morning they were to leave, Lydia rose before dawn. She dressed in the dark, checked her revolver, loaded 6 rounds, buckled the gun belt on her left hip. She braided her hair tight and pinned it under her hat. She found Samuel on the porch. He was already dressed, already saddled copper. He stood with his back against the post, looking out at the valley. The sky was pearl gray. The stars had faded, but the sun had not yet risen. Everything existed in that thin space between night and morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the folded cloth. Ruth's handkerchief. White cotton. The faded R barely visible in the corner. He held it out to her. "So you know the way back," he said. Lydia looked at the handkerchief. She understood what this was. This was not a cloth. This was the most precious thing he owned. The last physical piece of a woman he had loved and lost. And he was placing it in the hands of a woman he was only beginning to know. She took it carefully, folded it once more, and placed it inside the pocket of her coat, against her chest. "I will return it," she said, "by hand." He nodded. No kiss, no embrace. 2 people standing in the gray light, 3 feet apart. The distance between them smaller than it had ever been, and every inch of it charged with something neither of them had words for yet. Lydia mounted her horse. She looked at him one more time. Then she rode east. Samuel watched until she was a dark shape against the horizon, then a speck, then nothing. He stood there a moment longer, listening to the wind move through the grass. Then he went inside, loaded his rifle, saddled Old Copper, and rode west toward town. Red Hollow looked the same as always. Dust and tin roofs, and the smell of coffee from Mrs. Park's kitchen. Samuel tied his horse and walked the main street slowly. He stopped at the general store. Bought nothing, just looked and nodded and let people see him. Harlan found him outside the post office. The deputy was in a good mood, grinning, talkative. "Where is your house guest?" Harlan asked. "Gone," Samuel said. "Left yesterday. Said she had business elsewhere." Harlan's eyebrows rose. Just like that. Did not even say goodbye. "She is not the sentimental type." Harlan laughed. No, she is not." He paused. "Probably for the best, Sam. That one had trouble written on her from head to boot heel. You are better off with a quiet life." Samuel forced himself to nod. He forced himself to meet Harlan's eyes and see a friend's face, knowing what hid behind it. The effort cost him something physical, a tightness in his chest that would not release. He found Doc Merriweather in his office. The doctor was bandaging his own hand, a cut from a broken glass. He looked up when Samuel entered. Samuel closed the door and spoke quickly. He told Doc everything. Harlan, the note, Kane, Eleanor's disappearance, the forged letter, all of it. When he finished, Doc sat very still for a long time, his cut hand forgotten, blood seeping through the bandage. "I always knew," Doc said quietly. "Not the details. But I knew something about Tom Harlan did not add up." A deputy on his salary does not own 2 horses and a silver watch. I just could not prove it. Samuel asked him about the telegraph. Could he send one without Harlan knowing? Doc nodded. The telegraph operator is a boy named Willie Sutter, 17 years old. He is terrified of me because I stitched his arm last year without whiskey and he thinks I enjoyed it. He will send whatever I tell him to send and keep his mouth closed. Doc wrote the message carefully. Addressed to Colton Briggs, attorney at law, county seat, emergency registration of deed, living heir in danger, details to follow. He looked at Samuel. I have been drinking for 20 years to forget I was once a brave man. He picked up his whiskey bottle, studied it, set it down without drinking. Perhaps it is time I remembered. Samuel left town before noon. He took the canyon road north and circled back to the ranch by the long way. No one followed him. He was sure of it. He had checked the trail behind him every quarter mile. At the ranch he waited. 1 day, 2 days. No word from Lydia, no telegraph, no rider, just the wind and the cattle and the empty cabin, and the silence that was no longer comfortable. On the 3rd night she came back. He heard the horse before he saw it. Hard hooves on frozen ground, coming fast, too fast for someone carrying good news. He grabbed his rifle and went to the porch. She came out of the darkness at a gallop. The horse was lathered and blowing. Lydia pulled up at the gate and dismounted before the animal had fully stopped. Her face was pale beneath the dust. Her eyes were wild, not with fear, with fury. Eleanor was not ill, Lydia said. She was breathing hard. The words came in bursts. She was taken. 2 men came for her at a boarding house in Thornfield 3 weeks ago. The owner saw it. Eleanor did not want to go, but she went because they had guns and she had nothing. Samuel felt the ground shift beneath him. The letter that said Eleanor was sick and had sent Lydia in her place. Lydia read his face. She nodded. The letter she sent me. She did not write it. Someone forged it. Someone who knew her handwriting well enough to copy it. Someone who had access to every letter she ever wrote to you. Harlan. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Harlan had intercepted Eleanor's real letters. He had forged the one claiming illness. He had sent Lydia west, away from Eleanor, away from St. Louis. Not to protect Eleanor, but to separate the 2 sisters, to isolate them, so that Prescott Mining could pressure each one alone. Lydia sat down on the porch step. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. She put her head in her hands. I thought I was protecting her, she said. Her voice cracked. The armor that she had worn every day since stepping off that stagecoach cracked with it. I read that letter and I rode west as fast as I could because I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was keeping her safe by coming here. And the whole time she was locked in a room somewhere, and I was 800 miles away arguing about fence posts. Samuel sat down beside her. Down, not across from her, beside. Their shoulders touched. He did not put his arm around her, did not tell her it would be all right. He had lived through enough to know that false comfort was worse than no comfort at all. He said what she had once said to him. You did not leave her. You were deceived. There is a difference. She looked up at him. Her eyes were red. In the lamplight from the open cabin door, her face was stripped of every defense she owned. She looked young. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had spent her whole life running toward danger to protect someone else, and had just discovered that the running itself had been the trap. He held her gaze, steady, the way he held a frightened horse, with patience, with presence, without demand. We will find her, he said, and we will end this. The best trap is the kind the prey walks into, believing it is saving someone. They built the new plan in the gray hours before dawn. Lydia had not slept. Samuel had not tried. Not. They sat at the table with the map between them and the cold stove behind them, because neither of them had thought to light it, and by the time they noticed the cold, it had already settled into their bones. The situation was clear. Eleanor was being held somewhere, most likely in St. Louis or nearby. The men who took her would keep her alive as long as she was useful. A dead heir was worthless. A frightened living heir who could be forced to sign documents was valuable. That gave them time. Not much, but some. The inheritance had to be registered at the county seat before Prescott Mining filed their formal challenge in territorial court. Doc's telegraph to the lawyer Briggs would prepare the legal paperwork, but the papers were worthless without Eleanor's signature, or at minimum a certified copy of the deed with a living heir present to claim it. Two things had to happen. Eleanor had to be found and brought to safety, and the deed had to be registered. They could not do both at once. One person had to go east, one had to go to the county seat. Lydia would ride to St. Louis. She knew the trail. She knew how men like Kane's hired guns thought. She knew how they guarded. She knew how to get in and how to get out. This was her work. This was what she had done for years before Eleanor's letter brought her west. Samuel would carry the inheritance documents to the county seat. Doc had helped him obtain a certified copy from the county archive. With that copy and a sworn statement from the lawyer Briggs, they could begin the registration process. Eleanor could confirm in person once she was free. The problem was Harlan. He was watching. He knew Samuel's routines. He knew the roads. He would notice if Samuel left town or if Lydia returned. The solution came from Doc. The old physician rode out to the ranch that afternoon. He had dark circles under his eyes and a bruise on his cheekbone from where he had walked into a door. Or so he said. Lydia suspected the door had a name but did not press. Doc laid out his part. He would spread word through Red Hollow that Lydia had left for good and that Samuel was considering selling the ranch. He would tell Mrs. Park first because Mrs. Park told everyone second. Within 2 days, the whole town would believe the threat had passed. Harlan would report to Kane that the situation was handled. Kane would relax his guard on Eleanor. And in that window, Samuel and Lydia would move. It was not a perfect plan. Perfect plans did not exist. But it was a plan, and they were running out of time for anything better. Doc accepted the risk with a calmness that surprised Lydia. She had expected hesitation. Instead, she got a man who straightened his spine and looked 10 years younger. I have been hiding inside a bottle for 2 decades, he said, telling myself the world was too ugly to face sober. But ugly is just another word for honest, and honest is what is needed right now. He rode back to town with the story already forming in his mouth. That left Samuel and Lydia alone. One more night. The last night before they rode in opposite directions. Toward danger. Away from each other. The evening came slow. The sky turned amber, then copper, then deep blue. Stars appeared one by one like someone was lighting candles in a room too big to see. The wind died. For once the wind actually died. The air went still and the silence was so complete that Lydia could hear Samuel's heartbeat when she stood close enough on the porch. Or maybe it was her own. He was leaning against the post. She was sitting on the step. The cold was bitter now. Real cold. The kind that hurt bare skin. She pulled her coat tighter. She spoke first. If I do not come back. You will come back, he said. You cannot know that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened up and turned to face her. He placed his hand on the left side of his chest, over his heart. I know it because I am holding something of yours that you will want returned. She looked at him. The lamplight from the cabin window lit one half of his face. The other half was shadow. He was not smiling. He was not being clever. He was stating a fact that he believed with the same certainty he believed in the solidity of the ground beneath his boots. Something broke inside her. Not the crack. The whole wall. She felt it go. Felt the years of running and fighting and sleeping with a gun under her pillow and never staying long enough to learn anyone's middle name. Felt all of it crumble like a dam that had held too long. She stood. She walked to him. She put her hands on either side of his face. His beard was rough under her palms. His skin was warm despite the cold. She kissed him. It was not fierce, not desperate, slow and light and shaking, like two people who had grown so accustomed to loss that the act of reaching for something good felt like stepping off a cliff. He kissed her back. His hands found her waist, then her back. He pulled her close but gently, the way you hold something you are not sure you are allowed to keep. They stayed like that for a long time, foreheads touching, breathing together, the stars overhead turning slow as the earth moved beneath them. "If we survive this," she whispered. "We will," he said. "If we survive this, I do not want to keep running. Neither do I." She stepped back, looked at him one more time, memorized his face, the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth softened when he looked at her, the gray blue of his irises in the dim light. Then she went inside, and he stood on the porch alone, and the wind came back as if it had been waiting for something private to end before resuming its eternal work. Dawn had not broken when Lydia was already in the saddle, Ruth's handkerchief folded inside her coat pocket, against her heart. Samuel stood at the ranch gate watching her ride east. She did not look back. He watched until she was a black speck on the pale horizon. Then, nothing. He went inside, loaded his rifle, checked the documents one more time, folded them into a leather pouch and tucked it inside his shirt. Then he saddled Copper and rode the opposite direction. If everything held, they would meet at the county seat in 5 days. If it did not, then the handkerchief would be the only thing left of everything that had begun inside this house. 2 people, 2 directions, the same clock counting down. Lydia rode east for 3 days. She pushed hard, changed horses once at a way station outside of Rawlins, where a man owed her a favor from 2 years back. She slept 4 hours each night. Not because she was not tired, because she dreamed when she slept too long. And the dreams were of Samuel standing on his porch alone, waiting for someone who did not come back. St. Louis rose out of the flatland like a different world. Brick and smoke and the Mississippi running brown and wide and carrying the sound of steamboat whistles up and down the waterfront. She had lived here briefly 5 years ago, long enough to know the streets, long enough to know which ones to avoid. She went to Eleanor's last known address first, a boarding house on Elm Street run by a German woman named Mrs. Brower. The place was narrow and dark and smelled of boiled cabbage and fear. Mrs. Brower did not want to talk. She shook her head and waved her hands and said she did not know anything about anyone. Lydia sat down at the kitchen table and put $10 in coin on the wood. She did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She waited. Mrs. Brower looked at the money, then at Lydia, then at the door as if expecting someone to come through it. "They took her," she said finally. Her accent thickened the words. 2 men, 3 weeks ago. They said they were from a company. They had papers, legal papers, they said. She did not want to go. She was crying, but they had guns under their coats and she could see them. Where did they take her? The warehouse, by the river, the brick company. Schultz and Sons. It is closed now. Nobody there except whoever they are paying to keep her. Lydia memorized the address. She left the money and walked out. Schultz and Sons Brick Company sat at the end of a muddy lane that ran down to the river. The building was large and dark. The windows were boarded. A faded sign hung above the main door. No lights showed from the street side. But when Lydia circled around to the riverside, she saw a lamplight flickering through a crack in the boards on the ground floor. And she saw a man sitting on a crate outside the side door, smoking, a shotgun across his knees. She counted. 1 outside. Probably 2 more inside based on the rotation she watched over the next hour. 3 men total. Professional enough to have a guard. Not professional enough to have more than 1 on the door at a time. She waited until after midnight. The river fog rolled in thick and gray and smelling of mud and rot. It swallowed the lamplight. It swallowed everything. She came from the riverside, silent. The fog covered her approach. The outside guard was drowsy. His cigarette had gone out. She was behind him before he heard her. the butt of her revolver against the base of his skull. He went down, heavy and quiet, inside. A hallway, dark, the smell of brick dust and damp, lamplight ahead. She moved along the wall, found the second man asleep on a cot near the front door. She bound his hands and feet with rope she had brought, stuffed his own bandana in his mouth. He woke halfway through. She pressed the barrel of her revolver against his forehead and shook her head once. He went still. The third man was in a back room. He heard something. Came through the doorway with a pistol raised. He was fast, not fast enough. Lydia fired from 6 feet, left-handed. The bullet went through the meat of his right hand. His gun dropped. He screamed. She kicked his weapon away, put her boot on his wrist, looked down at him. "I'm only going to ask once," she said. "Where is she?" "Behind the last door." He gasped. "Back of the hall. Got the key, in my pocket." She took the key, found the door. A heavy thing with an iron lock. She turned the key and pushed it open. Eleanor sat on a cot in a room the size of a closet. She was thinner than Lydia remembered. Her dress was stained, her hair was loose and tangled. Her face was pale from weeks without sunlight. But her eyes were the same. That quiet Whitfield steadiness that their father had passed to both his daughters, though he had only ever claimed one. Eleanor looked up, saw Lydia in the doorway, and something in her face collapsed. Not into weakness, into relief so profound it was almost the same thing. "You came," Eleanor whispered. "You thought I would not." Eleanor's eyes filled. "I thought no one would." Lydia crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her sister into her arms. Eleanor was shaking. Lydia was not. Not on the outside. Inside, she was shaking so hard she thought her bones might come apart. "I am here," Lydia said, "and we are leaving, now." They rode west through the night. Lydia had secured 2 horses. She had planned the route. She had planned everything except the way Eleanor kept reaching across the space between their horses to touch Lydia's arm as if confirming she was real. 500 miles to the county seat. They could not make it in time by horse alone. At Effingham, they caught the westbound rail. Lydia paid for a private car with the last of her money. Eleanor slept for the first time in weeks. Lydia sat across from her with the revolver on her lap and watched the prairie scroll past the window and thought about a man standing on a porch in Wyoming waiting to find out if the world was going to let him keep something for once. Meanwhile, Samuel rode west. He kept to the back trails, avoided the main road, slept once in a line cabin he knew about from his cattle drives, ate jerky and hard bread and drank creek water cold enough to make his teeth ache. The documents stayed inside his shirt against his skin. He could feel them with every stride of the horse, paper and ink. The difference between Eleanor owning her land and Prescott Mining stealing it. On the second day, Thomas Harlan found him. Samuel was crossing a bare ridge when he heard the horse behind him. He knew the sound. Harlan rode a bay gelding with a heavy stride. Samuel had heard that horse 100 times coming up his ranch road on Saturday evenings. He turned. Harlan sat his horse 30 yards away. The badge was on his chest. His rifle was in the scabbard. His hand was on his thigh near his pistol. He was not smiling. "Sam," Harlan said. The warmth was gone from his voice. What was left was something flat. Tired. The voice of a man who had given up pretending. "Tom, Doc Merriweather is locked in his own office. Do not worry. He is not hurt. Just inconvenienced. He talked to that telegraph boy, and the telegraph boy talked to me. 50 cents. That is what loyalty costs in Red Hollow these days." Samuel said nothing. He sat his horse and looked at the man he had known for 12 years and saw a stranger wearing a friend's face. "I did not want this, Sam," Harlan said. "I owe Prescott Mining more money than you have ever seen. They own my house. They own my badge. They own every Saturday night I ever spent drinking your whiskey and pretending I was not counting the things you told me to report back. You could have told me," Samuel said. "I would have helped." Harlan shook his head and shook. "No one helps when Prescott calls in a debt. You do not know that world. I know the world where friends do not sell each other." Harlan flinched. It was small, but Samuel saw it. Something in those words landed where armor could not protect. "Give me the papers, Sam," Harlan said. "Give them to me and ride home, and this is over. You go back to your ranch, raise your cattle, find yourself another bride, one that does not come with a war attached." Samuel felt the documents against his chest. Thin paper, light as nothing, heavy as everything. No. Harlan drew. Samuel was faster, not by much. By the width of a heartbeat, his rifle came up from across the saddle and he fired. Not at Harlan, at the bridle rein. The leather snapped. The bay gelding spooked sideways. Harlan grabbed for the mane and missed. He fell. Hit the ground hard. The pistol skidded across the dirt. Samuel dismounted, walked over, picked up Harlan's weapon. Stood above the man who had eaten at his table and lied to his face and sold his hope for $50 a month. "You going to kill me?" Harlan asked. He was on his back, dust on his face, no fear in his eyes, just exhaustion. "No," Samuel said. "I am going to let the law handle you, because that is the line between you and me." He took Harlan's horse, tied it to a scrub pine, left Harlan on the ground with a canteen and his coat. It was a 2-hour walk back to town. Harlan would make it. He was not meant to die on this ridge. He was meant to live long enough to face what he had done. Samuel rode on. He reached the county seat by late afternoon. It was a larger town than Red Hollow. Brick buildings, a courthouse, a land office with the territorial seal above the door. He went inside. Virgil Kane was waiting for him. Kane sat in a chair near the registrar's desk, legs crossed, hat on his knee. 2 men stood behind him, hired guns, the kind with dead eyes and new boots. They did not bother pretending to be anything other than what they were. Kane smiled. "Mr. Reed, you came alone, without your girl and her gun." He tilted his head. Brave or foolish? Samuel walked past them to the registrar's desk. The registrar was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. Samuel placed the leather pouch on the desk. Inside was the certified copy of the deed. The sworn statement. The letter from the lawyer Briggs confirming the claim. "This is the legal deed of inheritance for Eleanor Whitfield," he said. "I am requesting you certify it now." Kane uncrossed his legs. The smile did not leave his face, but it changed, hardened. "I do not think so," Kane said. He nodded to his men. The one on the left reached for his gun. Samuel moved. He grabbed the registrar by the arm and pulled him down behind the desk. The first shot came a half-second later. It hit the wall where the registrar's head had been. The second shot hit Samuel, left shoulder. He felt it like being struck by a hammer. The impact spun him sideways. He hit the wall, slid, caught himself. Pain came after, white and hot and radiating outward. He pressed his back against the wall, drew his pistol with his right hand. The left arm hung useless. Blood soaked through his shirt. He could feel it warm and fast running down his side. He aimed at the 2 gunmen. They aimed back. Stalemate. Kane stood between them, calm, as if this were a business negotiation that had merely turned impolite. "You will bleed out before anyone comes. Mr. Reed, be reasonable." Bootsteps in the corridor. Fast. More than one person. The door opened. Lydia walked in. Her revolver was already drawn. Her eyes swept the room in less than a second. 2 gunmen. Kane, Samuel bleeding against the wall. She catalogued all of it the way she catalogued everything, instantly, completely. Behind her, Eleanor stepped into the doorway, pale, thin, but standing, alive, present. Lydia leveled her weapon at Kane. Her hand was steady, her voice was ice. "Tell your men to drop their guns." Kane looked at Lydia, at Eleanor, at Samuel, who was bleeding but still on his feet with his pistol raised. The mathematics of the situation had changed. 2 guns against 2 guns. But one of his men was already looking at the door, calculating his exit. The other had begun to sweat. "Drop them," Kane said quietly. His voice had lost its polish. What was left was just a tired old man in a dusty suit, who had bet everything on a hand that did not play out. The guns hit the floor. Lydia looked at the registrar, who was still hiding behind his desk. "Sign the papers," she said. The registrar crawled out. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. But he signed. He stamped. He certified. The deed was registered. Eleanor Whitfield was the legal owner of land in the Silver Range of Wyoming Territory. Recorded. Official. Done. Kane walked to the door. He stopped, turned back, looked at Eleanor. "This is not over," he said. Eleanor met his eyes. She was trembling, but she spoke clearly. "You underestimated me because I am a woman. That mistake has already cost you. I suggest you do not make it again." Kane left. His men followed. The door closed behind them. Samuel slid down the wall. His back left a red smear on the plaster, blood soaking through his shirt, pooling on the floor. Lydia was beside him before he hit the ground. Her hands pressed hard against the wound. "Do not die," she said. And her voice shook for the first time since he had known her. "I just found the way back." He smiled, weak. His face was going pale. "My handkerchief." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out Ruth's handkerchief. It was creased and damp with 3 days of sweat and trail dust. She pressed it against his shoulder to slow the bleeding. The white cotton turned red. The cloth had finally done the one thing it was always meant to do. Hold someone here. Doc Merriweather said the bullet missed the artery by 1.25 inches. Samuel said that was a comfortable margin. Doc said if he considered 1.25 inches comfortable, then he deserved the girl with the gun. 3 weeks passed. Autumn gave way fully to winter. The first snow came early to the north ridge, covering the fences and the barn roof and the dead grass in a blanket of white that made the world look like it had been erased and redrawn cleaner than before. Samuel recovered at the ranch. The shoulder wound closed slowly. Doc rode out every 3 days to check the stitches and change the bandage and drink coffee that he said tasted like river mud, but never refused. Lydia made the coffee every morning. It was still brutally strong. Samuel drank it without comment. He had stopped noticing the taste somewhere around the 2nd week. Or maybe he had started to like it. He was not sure there was a difference. Lydia stayed. She had not said the words yet, not officially, but she stayed. She rose each morning before dawn and fed the cattle and checked the fences and hauled water from the well. She did these things one-handed half the time because she was also carrying a tray or a plate or a basin of warm water for his wound. She cooked badly. The eggs were always either raw in the center or burned to leather at the edges, and the bread she attempted once came out the weight and consistency of a river stone. Samuel ate everything without complaint. He watched her from the bed during those first days when Doc insisted he stay flat, watched her move through the cabin with the same efficiency she moved through everything. She cleaned her revolver after supper. She mended a tear in his coat with stitches that were perfectly even, which surprised him until he remembered that precision was precision whether applied to a trigger or a needle. She did not put the gun beneath her pillow anymore. She hung it on a hook beside the kitchen door, within reach but not intimate, a tool rather than a companion. The migration of that weapon from under her pillow to the bedside table to the wall was a map of something she probably did not realize she was drawing. Trust. The news from town came in pieces. Thomas Harlan was arrested by the county sheriff 2 days after the confrontation on the ridge. He had walked back to Red Hollow, turned himself in, did not resist. The sheriff transported him to the territorial jail in Laramie to await trial before the circuit judge. The charges were conspiracy and fraud and aiding in the commission of abduction. He would face years, many years. Samuel did not visit. He thought about it. On cold nights when the wind pressed against the cabin walls and the fire crackled low, he thought about driving to Laramie and standing outside the iron door and saying something. He did not know what, maybe nothing. Maybe just standing there would have been enough. Instead, he sent a Bible, gave it to Doc to deliver. No note inside, just the book. Whatever Harlan did with it was between him and whatever he believed in. It was not forgiveness, it was release. Samuel could not carry the weight of another man's choices. He had enough weight of his own. Virgil Kane fared worse. The territorial prosecutor in Cheyenne brought charges of abduction and conspiracy to fraudulently seize land and intimidation of territorial officials. Kane's assets were frozen, his accounts seized. Prescott Mining Company, seeing the coming storm, withdrew its claims against the Silver Range rather than face a public trial that would expose the company's methods across every newspaper in the territory. The board of directors sent a letter distancing themselves from Kane and his actions. Kane was last seen boarding an eastbound train. Whether he ran from the law or simply ran did not matter. He was gone, and the land was safe. Eleanor stayed at the county seat. She hired the lawyer Briggs on permanent retainer. She began the process of surveying her land and establishing a small, legitimate mining operation. She wrote letters to Samuel, long ones, warmer than the ones she had sent before. Not the letters of a woman to a potential husband, the letters of a woman to a brother she had chosen. One line stayed with him. "I wrote you a bride." She wrote, "Fate edited my draft. I believe Fate's version is the better story." Doc Merriweather changed too. He did not stop drinking entirely. A man of 60 years does not abandon a decades-long habit overnight, but the bottle moved from his desk to his cabinet. From always open to sometimes open, he told Mrs. Park one afternoon while buying bandages that he was too old to become a hero but young enough to try. Mrs. Park laughed. It was the first time anyone in Red Hollow had heard her laugh. The sound was surprisingly warm, like something that had been locked in a cold room for years and finally found a door. Red Hollow returned to its rhythms. Dust and wind and the smell of coffee from Mrs. Park's place. The stagecoach on Thursdays. The church bell on Sundays. The small, ordinary machinery of a small, ordinary town that had briefly brushed against something larger and was content to forget it. On a morning in late November, Lydia stood at the ranch fence looking out over the valley. The snow had melted overnight into a thin crust of ice that glittered in the early light. The cattle moved slow across the far pasture. Steam rose from their backs. The sky was the pale blue that only Wyoming produced. Enormous, empty, clean. Samuel walked to her side. His left arm was out of the sling now. The shoulder was stiff but healing. He moved it carefully. The way a man moves something he has recently learned to trust again. They stood together, not speaking. The wind moved through the valley below them, carrying the smell of pine and snow and cold earth. "I have never stood still in one place this long," Lydia said. She said it to the valley, not to him, but he heard it. "You want to leave?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and serious, and in them he saw something he had never seen before. Not toughness, not armor, not the hard, bright edge of a woman who trusted nothing and no one. Fear. "I want to stay," she said, "but I'm afraid I will want to leave, and I am afraid that will hurt you." Samuel considered this. He looked at the valley, at the cattle, at the cabin behind them where smoke rose from the chimney straight up into the windless air. Ruth did not choose to go. He said slowly, "The sickness took her. I sat beside that bed for 7 days and begged God or fate or anything that would listen to let me keep her. And none of it mattered. She went anyway." He turned to face Lydia. "I have spent 3 years afraid of losing someone again. Afraid that caring meant standing by while something I loved was carried away. But I would rather fear losing you every day than live safe without you." Lydia's eyes changed. They did not soften exactly. They opened, the way a door opens when someone finally stops bracing against it. "If I stay as I am," she said. "Not a mail-order bride, not a proper woman who bakes bread and presses flowers. I will still carry a gun. I will still make coffee strong enough to strip the paint off a barn. I will still check the perimeter before bed. I will still—" He kissed her, mid-sentence, unhurried. The wind moved through them, carrying the smell of silver grass and pine and the cold, clean nothing of Wyoming winter. She tasted like bad coffee and trail dust and something underneath both of those things. Something warm, something that tasted the way coming home feels when you have been gone so long, you forgot the word for it. When he pulled back, he kept his hands on her face. "I never asked you to change," he said. "I asked you to be here." She closed her eyes, opened them. Her lashes were wet, not crying, just wet. "Then I will stay," she said. "Not because I was sent, not because I am running, because I choose this place, and I choose you." Their first winter came in hard. Snow piled against the cabin walls. The creek froze solid. Lydia wrapped herself in 2 blankets at night and still shivered because the cold of Wyoming was different from any cold she had known. It came through the walls, through the floor, through the gaps in the window frame that Samuel had patched with rags and pine resin. He added wood to the stove every night without saying a word. She did not thank him. She only sat closer to the fire, and her shoulder touched his, and that was all the language they needed. The chair on the right side of the table was no longer empty. In the evenings, Lydia still cleaned her revolver after supper. Samuel still read by lamplight. They did not speak much, but the silence between them was not the hollow kind. It was the kind that had been filled, the kind that comes when 2 people have said the important things and no longer need to prove it with words. Red Hollow eventually stopped whispering. Mrs. Park took to calling Lydia Samuel's girl with the gun. The town accepted the title the way it accepted the weather, without debate, without understanding, simply because it was. Spring came. The snow melted. The creek ran fast and clear. Lydia planted nothing because she had no talent for growing things. Instead, she built a new fence around the south pasture, straight and strong. Samuel watched her work and thought that she built fences the way she did everything, with her whole self, no part held back. Someone asked Samuel once, at the general store, a rancher from the next valley over who had heard the story second-hand and third-hand and wanted to hear it from the man himself. "Do you regret the way it turned out?" Samuel looked through the window. Lydia was outside, mending a harness strap with her teeth clenched and her hat pushed back and the revolver swaying at her hip each time she bent down. The sun was in her hair. She looked up as if she felt his gaze and gave him a look that was not a smile but was not far from one. "The mail-order bride never came," he said. "But the one I needed did." The Wyoming wind blew through the valley the way it always did, ceaseless, patient, carrying the smell of sage and pine and the mineral sharpness of distant snow. But on the north ridge inside the small cabin that one man had built for loneliness, the stove smoke rose thicker now. Enough for 2.